right from one session to the other. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for Future Financial Strategies. Carol Edmondson from InAdvisors will be hosting this session with her special guest, Marco. And Marco, I do not want to chop your name up. So if you could
pronounce DiMizio.
DiMizio. Okay, thank you for that. Carol is going to be discussing, take a look at where we've been very slightly, but where we need to move forward, looking at financial strategies down the road, you know, short-term, long-term, just to give some ideas, a little bit of direction to innkeepers to help offset this should this reoccur. COVID doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon, but should there be something else that interrupts the travel and tourism business? So Carol, I'm going to put myself on mute and I will be back in about 45 minutes to give you a little bit of 5-minute warning.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Just a quick check. Can everybody see that presentation?
I don't see it, Carol.
Okay, hang on. All right, let's see here. We lost Eric, so.
I'm still here.
He's there.
Oh, Eric, I am just going to share my screen here, and I just want to make sure everybody has got it.
Perfect. I see it now.
We're good.
Yes,
All
good.
right.
We're
Yay,
good to go.
team.
And Cheryl, what I'm going to do is I've uploaded your presentation. I will put that in the chat box momentarily here. And if anybody wants to review it later, that information will be in the chat box. They can open it and kind of take a look at it over lunch if they'd like. But that information will go in the chat box here in just a moment.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Eric.
Sure thing.
Appreciate it. So thanks for joining, everyone. We have a lot we want to talk about, and I'm with InAdvisors, and as is Marco, but Marco is also an innkeeper, active innkeeper. He owns the Candleberry Inn here on Cape Cod, and he also works with us at InAdvisors. And so his perspective, I think, is going to be helpful along with mine in terms of how we look at financial strategy from here. Don't pretend to say that I've got a playbook that matches everybody's needs, but I do think we have a lot of great ideas for you in terms of putting together a strategy that gets you from where you are to where you want to be. And for any of you who've ever sat in on a presentation with me before, you know my focus is going to be entirely on the bottom line, so nothing's changed there. But we're going to talk a little bit about what that is in today's world, and how you get from where you are, which we all understand is not a simple thing. So so let's talk a little bit about what do we mean when we say bottom line. So there are elements to the bottom line beyond just profit at the end of the day. I think really 3 areas: return on investment, which in the short term should be your net income, what you walk away with at the end of the year. When we think about 2020, I know that that's not a pretty picture, but the whole point of this discussion is to say, knowing you are where you are, what do you do? How do you tackle it? So definitely short term, we want to focus on how do you get to the net income that you need or want. And then in the longer term, of course, it's all about business value. One equates to the other in the end. So how you operate your business year over year is going to give you that ultimate business value. And we're going to dig into return on investment a little bit further as we go along. Another aspect to the bottom line is clearly guest satisfaction. You know, how your guests see the experience. And I did sit in on the session, for those of you who did just before, and there was a lot of great discussion about what people are doing for their guests and to meet the requirements that are being put in front of you that you have no control over. But truly, you have some things that are powerful here. Your location, what you've done to create that sense of safety, and the kind of information you're providing to guests are all a part of your bottom line in terms of the way that ultimately is going to drive guests to come and stay with you, to come back again, to refer you to other people. And then, of course, there's the personal side of bottom line, which is very real. You know, you're surviving through a very difficult time. We're all trying to figure it out. And your responsibility as a business person, even when you're feeling overwhelmed, is to be prepared when something like this comes along as best you can, even though you can't name it. Even though there's no way for you to say what that next event is going to be, you need to be, as a business person, you need to have the tools in place, not after it happens, but long before, so that when you're faced with a challenge, you at least know where you are and you can begin to build from there. So this is where the whole planning process comes in. So important in any business, not just in your business, for sure. Let's dig a little into return on investment. For some of you, this is totally intuitive. And I can tell you from working with lots of clients, for some of you, this is something you hope you don't ever have to think about, even though you do. So return on investment, lots of measurements that are used to look at a business, any business, whether it be your income at the gross level, whether it be your net after expenses, your average daily rate, what your occupancy is. There are lots of ways that people think about, how am I doing? And your business is typically valued by the rest of the world as what we call a going concern. And what that means is that if you were, for example, to go back to your lender to redo your mortgage, or if you were going to pass your property on to your kids at a point in time, or if you decided you were going to sell your property, take your profits and go do something fun, that concept of a going concern and what makes it up is something you really need to understand. So the pieces are real estate, your furniture, fixtures, and equipment, which in a business situation is an important part of the going concern. I'm the person taking over. I've got everything I need to do that. And then your net operating income, because what that represents to the rest of the world is something, you know, we refer to as business people, the concept of goodwill. Well, if you're trying to quantify goodwill, what is that? The expression of goodwill or of that overall value of all the work that you do is net operating income. So it's important to look at value from that point of view, because you want to think like a lender, think like a buyer, think like an inheritor, think like an investor, or think like an appraiser. If you can think like that about your business, it will make a tremendous amount of difference in terms of how do you deal with that event that you're not expecting, because you're already on top of what have I got here, and therefore what can I do with it. So every single business is a work in progress, and I love some of these examples because most of us are familiar with these industries or companies, but you don't always think about the fact that they have all and continue to go through major revelations and changes that are outside their control. They, like us, are all dealing with, you know, how does the pandemic affect them? But I'm thinking now of other kinds of changes that might have happened in their business lives. And the one that really resonates for me, because before I was an innkeeper, I worked in high tech, and IBM was my biggest competitor. And back then, for those of you who remember the good old hardware days, IBM owned the universe. They dominated completely worldwide, and it was all about hardware. And while they were sleeping, because they thought they owned the marketplace, systems became what customers wanted, and customers started to drive the decision process, which they never had before, never. IBM told you what you were going to buy and why and how. Overnight, while they were asleep at the switch, system integration and overall full systems and customer requirements became what drove the computer business. IBM came within a hair's breadth of going out of business entirely. Their stock plummeted. They lost all respect in the industry. They couldn't figure out who they were. And until they woke up and said, okay, this is the world I'm in, I gotta work with it, they were in a world of trouble. It's not the same thing as the pandemic, but I think the point here is there's always something around the corner that can impact your business. It's certainly not just you, certainly not just our industry, but all the more reason to think like a business person and be prepared, because you don't know. And because if you are asleep at the switch, that's when you get hurt. And it can happen to anyone. So another quick point here that I think is really important. We're hearing a lot in the media about people wanting to get away from urban areas, about the whole concept of people wanting to be outdoors and away from it all and in the wilderness. And, you know, because the fear factor of the pandemic drives that media story. But what we know is absolutely true, that regardless of what market you are in, whether you are urban or village or rural or resort, whether your guests are business travelers or leisure travelers, you as a small property have an opportunity that larger hospitality properties simply don't have. Being independent is huge. So don't assume that because you're in a village setting or in an urban setting that somehow you are disadvantaged, because the minute you start to think that way, you will be. Instead, you need to think about what is it that's driving this traveler and why would they stay with you rather than the big box hotel. And there are a lot of reasons why that might happen. So to that end, what we're going to focus on are this list of assets and how you should be maximizing these assets in order to make the most of what you have, because what you have has real value right now in the travel marketplace. And probably you are in a stronger position than big box hotels if you understand how to market what you've got. And if you have a plan that clearly shows your guests why there's a benefit to staying with you. So we're going to talk about your stakeholders, who's at the table today that you should be doing business with. We're going to talk about your location and how you maximize that local network, which is something that with all of the online marketing that we do, we often tend to ignore. Not a smart move today. Today you want to be all over your local network. We're going to talk about your property itself, your staff, your operations, and how the things you can do or already have done, and many of you have done, that are going to serve you well long-term, not just as we're working our way out of all of this, but in the longer term as well. So some of these changes, you know, sometimes when the going gets tough, things happen. Changes are thrust upon you, and as you look back, I think you might find that you might be glad they did. Guests, can't say enough, and we're going to spend some time talking about the importance of your guests. This is an asset that is like cash in the bank. And then, of course, money and surviving very specifically through this time by taking advantage of what's available to you from many different sources to just manage your way through this ugly financial period of time. And most of you have heard this and done it, but if you haven't, there are still great opportunities available, and there will continue to be to get some help if you need it. So let's just run through these and talk about some of them. So in terms of your stakeholders, you know I love this fantasy board of directors. Everybody ought to have one. There are a lot of people at the table who you should be using as resources for your business. But for today, what I really want to talk about is your community. More than ever, as you are trying to put together that story about a trip that is safe, that is well planned, and that you have taken some control of to make sure that your guests are safe and well informed, working with your business community is a huge opportunity. And the secret there, if you haven't spent a lot of time with your local network, is to think about the things your guests need and want, and then to collaborate with other people in your community who serve your guests, and to take the approach with them about what's in it for them. Oftentimes when we're working with clients, they tend to sort of knock on the door of other local businesses and ask for discounts, ask for help, ask for them to do something special for their guests. I submit to you that that's backwards. You ought to be putting together a story for your local network that's all about what's in it for them. Because if there isn't something specific in it for them, and especially now where everyone is in this boat, I'm not sure why they would spend their precious time. So the way to approach this is to work with people in your community to say, what is it that I can do, understanding enough about your business so that I can be smart? What is it that I can do to get my guests working, taking advantage of what you have to offer? When your collaborators can see that there's a bottom line for them, it feeds right back into your story and therefore into your bottom line. So very different approach than we often see. And even though I know you've had enough new ideas, thank you very much, and you don't ever want to talk about a pandemic again, but think about adopting some new ideas and new approaches. The lack of guests that we've had for Smart Innkeepers has been an amazing time to do some planning and to think about those things that you thought you might try someday, but you really didn't have time to deal with. This is an amazing time to adopt new ideas. And it's something that guests recognize. They know that you're paying attention, that you're working differently, and it pays off in a big way. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about location. So I said to you earlier that there's opportunities in absolutely every market. You don't have to be in a remote rural location in order to benefit from the concerns that people have about traveling, because your size and the fact that you're independent is absolutely a superpower in the world that we're in right now, because you can articulate something about the known versus the unknown that makes people feel that even though they're leaving home, they're still going to be okay, because they're going to be with you. You will have curated a guest experience that gives them the information they need. And it's everything from leisure travelers wanting to know, is it safe to go to this park or this event, or business travelers who need to get from where you are to a business meeting across town. And maybe it's as simple as, what's the safe public transportation? How do I navigate your city safely in order to do the business that I need to do? So there are any number of ways that you can put together an experience for your guests that only you can do, that a big box hotel or another style of property simply doesn't have the bandwidth to manage, because they don't have the ability to understand their guests at the level that you do. And they don't have the control over their environment that you do.
Carol,
So,
can
yes,
I just
Marco,
add
jump
to this? So one of the things we did to bring this to life is we wrote a blog about this, about the benefits of a small property versus a large one. And we're a 9-room inn, so there will never be more than 18 to 20 people on our property. Owner operated, so the attention to detail and just being careful with all of the new procedures that we've put in place will be managed very carefully. We wrote a blog about it. We have it as a pop-up on our website, so that when someone visits our website, it pops up. We've shared it on social media in our e-blasts, and it seems to be working really well. And just to add on to what Carol was mentioning before about value and ADR, we've actually increased our rates as a result, because the demand for our property like this over the last maybe 3 weeks or so, because prior to that everything was quiet and we just opened June 18th. But once things opened up in our state, in Massachusetts, the demand has grown amazingly. And we never lowered our rates, but we've increased them over the last 3 weeks. And my ADR has gone up a lot. In normal times, I probably wouldn't have seen such an increase. But the fact that we offer this experience that is small, not a lot of people, distanced breakfast service outside that is all served, nothing is buffet or shared, very careful procedures with the guest rooms and common areas, and communicating all of that. We hated having to put together these procedures to be in compliance with our state and our health department, but we put them on our site. On our website, there is a banner at the top of the site with a COVID-19 update. I hated having to do that, but we have it there, and it's very detailed. Some of our neighbors felt that it was too much detail to be sharing with the guests. It actually was the opposite. Our guests loved that they see every little thing we're doing, from the contactless check-in, through the breakfast, through the rooms, through the afternoon snack. How are you delivering that? Because it used to be a dome that people shared. Now it's individual boxes, and how is that going to be served? Guests love that. And when they call and ask a few more questions, the feedback has been amazing. And the new guests that we've gotten as a result of this, they certainly will be new repeat guests. These are people that traveled the world and had to cancel their plans around the world and needed something a little closer within a 3 to 4 hour drive. And over the last 2 weeks, the guests that we've had have been amazing, new friends, great feedback. The whole thing has just been amazing. And I'm sorry to go on so long, Carol.
No, please. I of course know how well Marco has had great success, and that's because he's really dug in and done the work, and it's paying off. And speaking of that, just talking a little bit about the property itself, everyone has had to make pretty significant changes to their guest rooms, their common areas, their breakfast service. We all had to struggle with, based on our each state's different set of rules and regulations, and those that keep changing. I think everyone's dealing with a sort of ever-changing scene. But I will say that in the world of things you might consider keeping, some of the editing and simplification that I've seen that you are doing is something that your guests are actually very happy to see, having nothing to do with the pandemic. So think about those simplified rooms, those simplified common areas, and think about the things that you might not need to put back or want to put back, because truly today's traveler is looking for that serenity, that simplification, and wants to really appreciate the wonderful things about your building. So it may be, again, in the world of when the world goes crazy, sometimes great improvements are developed or discovered. I would say before you put it all back, think about the fact that some of what you've done might actually be a permanent change. You may want to rebrand yourself, in a sense, as being more in tune with today's traveler. But also, where you're in a situation where revenue is an extraordinary issue, and we all know that this year is not going to be a pretty picture for anyone, as you're looking at your common space in particular, you might want to think about repurposing, not just simplifying your common space, but repurposing it for gathering so that guests do feel more comfortable to use your common space. So on the one hand, what that does, excuse me, is to drive more repeats, because guests feel, if I want to take my laptop and do some work, for example, that I don't have to sit in my room. I could actually go to the common space if it was set up so that I felt safe. And that idea of creating common space that's small gathering areas is really much more in tune with what today's traveler is looking for So again, making those changes, thinking differently about the positioning of furniture and the way that lighting is done so that there are lots of spaces that are sort of flexible and can be changed if they need to be. You know, if two people are going to use a corner, or if it's a group of four who are going to pull over a couple of chairs, you know, think about your common space as being that great. I always think of the ideal common space is that great local one-off coffee shop that everybody wants to hang out in. You know, you want it to be that welcoming space that gives me just enough privacy to have my business meeting, but also allows for light and air and allows other people to do the same within that space. But, you know, if you're struggling, and I think most of us are, with the revenue side of the ledger, another thing that you might want to do, and I've heard some great ideas from innkeepers, is to look at your common space in terms of other revenue opportunities. So if you go through this exercise of rethinking the way your space is laid out, you may find that there are local opportunities or even small group opportunities as we reopen that would become attractive and would actually be a source of revenue. So for example, if you were able to create in your common space what could be a really good meeting space, excuse me, that might actually attract some local business people who would be happy to pay for the use of that space. I was in a board meeting this morning, and one of the people on our board actually owns a collective business space where people pay a fee to use the space as their own office. And it's very open and very much in today's mode of how businesses are set up. And that business is, although they certainly stalled for a while, is having quite the resurgence right now. Because as people are beginning to work more and more from home, when they do want a space to get away, when they've had enough of the dog and kids, or when they want to meet with a client, they're looking for that kind of space. And you may own that space, and it may be a source of revenue at a time when other revenue is not what you'd like it to be. So I submit that it's not a bad idea to think about how else your property might be used. Another thing we've seen innkeepers doing is thinking about longer stays where they might be appropriate and sort of moving into that short-term rental space at a time of year when you wouldn't otherwise be busy. And that's another great way to sort of rethink how you might use your space and maximize at a time when getting that revenue in the door might be tough. So a lot of ways to think about it, but I think the bottom line is you should be thinking about it and working on that new approach. And of course, when it comes to staffing, as you've made the changes you've made, I'm sure that where you have staff, that you've also had to bring them along and hopefully bring them back as you get busy enough to be able to re-employ them. And bring them into the picture of what it is that you're offering. And that's not simple. It's not easy, but it's going to be a critical part of what your guests see. So that also needs to be a part of the plan, for sure. So Marco touched on this briefly, and this is an area where I know he has a lot to share with us, but guests are like money in the bank. And if you haven't, we've all probably heard about loyalty programs and value add and the way to say thank you. But I think the critical message here is that these are things that you should be implementing now, because your repeat guests are becoming more critical every day because they know you and they love you. Marco, do you want to talk about what you're doing?
Sure. It's not discounting. So there are a lot of different ways to reach out to your guests. But most importantly is asking them to help you with reviews. And besides the TripAdvisor and sending the emails, one thing that I actually do the morning that the guest is checking out is I share a little thank you card with them. It looks like this. It's the size of an index card, so they can put it in their wallet. The front is just our contact information, and the back lists the different travel partners, and there's an area for me to write personal thank you to them. It was great meeting you, or it was great seeing you again. And we list TripAdvisor, Google, Facebook, and Yelp. Those are the main ones. And we thank them for staying with us. This is a little thank you card. If you don't mind doing a review for us, we'd be very appreciative, but no pressure. That's what I say each morning. Usually when they're finishing up their breakfast, I bring it over to their plate. And this seems to be working out great because we can solicit the TripAdvisor reviews by sending them the email, but there really isn't a way to do the Google ones. And we tried those text things and nothing was really great. For me, this, even though it's an old-fashioned paper thing, is working the best right now. But you know, thanking them, and they love seeing this little handwritten thing. They put it in their wallet. It's wonderful. So anything else, Carol? I know we're tight on time, so I don't want to take too much.
No, not at all. I just think that, again, I can't emphasize this enough. This is not going to be a great year financially, but that's not a reason to begin discounting your rooms.
No.
The value add here is so important, and guests are happy to pay for value. So if you are thinking through what you're offering, and truly you are offering more because you've done all this work to make them safe, and if you're curating that wonderful experience so that they have all the information they need to get where they want to be, to take advantage of that best little spot, you know, your favorite little hideaway that no one else knows about, all those little things that make innkeepers so valuable to their guests. We see no reason why you would be discounting at this point. You're not going to recover your year by offering discounts, and so often it's a counterintuitive effect where guests are looking at properties in your area and suddenly see you as that least expensive inn. That's not a good message. That's not how people travel. The fear and concern about why you are giving it away will often override the desire to stay with you. So yeah. I would say that, and we are clear with our clients, you know, this is the year to hold the line and to price appropriately for the value that you're adding, and to add value that you hadn't thought of before. So hopefully everyone is comfortable to do that. And then, as depending on who your guests are and how you relate to them, thinking creatively about the kinds of things they would appreciate, and making sure that you've examined the possibilities for loyalty programs, for value adds, some of the touchless check-in products that are available to you, and the ways that you can get your guests from point A to point B in a way that maybe nobody else in the area really can, are things that guests are going to remember and that they're going to tell other people about. The first people to travel are going to be questioned in social media and amongst their close friends and family about what it was like. And what you need and want is for them to tell the story of how amazing it was to stay with you, because you made it all feel right, even though it was a sort of odd experience after all this time. So Carol, love your guests. Yes.
Two quick things.
Yes.
One, we've done some legwork for the restaurants near us. We always had restaurants that we referred, but now what are they doing? So it took me an afternoon to reach out to all our preferred restaurants and where we send our guests to. And I created a list with a little chart to the right. And on the chart, it has curbside pickup, outdoor dining, indoor dining, which is just starting. And I check off what they're doing, because some are not going to resume indoor dining at all this season. And just having that little curated list that I print out and leave in the guest room has worked really well. The guests are very appreciative of that. We also have that in our TouchStay app, where we signed up with TouchStay because we got rid of the in-room guest books. And we have all of that in there. And in there, it states, you know, what each restaurant is doing once it's listed. Are they curbside? Are they outdoor? Do you need a reservation? Do you call in advance? One other thing that has gone over really well the last 2 weeks, our common area coffee pantry is closed. We can't have a Keurig there. You can't have a shared anything right now. So to do that, to compensate for that, if guests want coffee or tea throughout the day, just let us know. We're around till a reasonable hour in the evening, 7, 8 o'clock. And the guests have really liked that. They'll text me, my text number is everywhere and the welcome notes everywhere. And they ask for either espresso or coffee, and we have it ready for them in the dining room. And everyone is masked up, but they're very appreciative. It's an opportunity to share a few words, because not everyone wants to talk much, but that has gone over very well, and very appreciative of that. It's just another way to demonstrate that value, and it's personalized, almost like a concierge service for them.
Thank you. Okay, last but not least, money. So in the short term, I'm sure you've been inundated. ALP's done a great job of sharing information, as have your local and state. And if you're taking advantage of PPP and EIDL and all of that, that's an opportunity that makes some real business sense. If you haven't done anything yet, by the way, those programs are still around, and there's still money available. If you felt you missed out first time around, not so much. There's still money available, and you should talk with your accountant or your local lender if you don't have the information that you need. But in any case, we've taken advantage or chosen not to, whatever it might be. Not just the CARE program, but also whatever relationship you have with your lender, where most lenders have offered some form of forbearance. People with SBA loans got a 6-month gift. Thank you very much. First time I've seen SBA give anything away. And that's important, that you have that kind of relationship. So in the longer term, and when you get surprised by something like this that you had no control over and you did everything right and here you are, having those longer term relationships in place, it really comes to the forefront. You should have the kind of relationship with your lender, with your investors, whatever your fallback resources might be, so that you have some flexibility when something like this happens. You shouldn't have to introduce yourself to your lender the day that you need help, whether it's because of the pandemic or whether it's because you suddenly need to replace the roof on the building. It doesn't matter. That relationship should be in place. That lender is on your fantasy board of directors. That lender is aware of every success that your business has. And that's how you build flexibility. That's where you can pick up the phone and say, hey, I need you to jump in and be a part of the solution. There are lines of credit that are available for commercial properties that you might never use, but the day you need it, it can be critically important. And the only way that you can take advantage of those relationships and manage all of that is to create systems so that you understand where you are financially at any given time. And I understand that for most of us, this is not your favorite way. You'd much rather be working with your guests or enjoying being an innkeeper. But this is something you can't afford to ignore. And something like the pandemic sort of gives you a slap in the face that says, I needed to do a better job. I needed to either up my game on the revenue side. I needed to manage those expenses that I hate thinking about. I'd much rather just go out and do the good things for my guests. It's not really an option as a business person. You owe it to yourself to manage what you're doing. It's not a complicated process, even if you're not financially minded. Is not my strength. But it's something that, and by the way, it is Marco's. Thank goodness, we love having him because he does have that background. But Marco, tell us a little bit about some of the things that you do to track where you are.
So just also talking about the relationships in March, when all of this started to fall apart and we didn't know the future months were going to look like, but we did start getting a lot of cancellations, and our European visitors make up approximately 30% of our guest base, you know, from the UK and Germany. We were just hemorrhaging refunds, as I'm sure everyone else on this webinar was as well. The first call I made was to our commercial lender. We don't have an SBA loan, so we didn't have that gift for 6 months. So for us, we were able to restructure it where it's just interest-only payments monthly, and the principal gets deferred. So it's something, you know, it pretty much cut it in half. So that was very helpful. So really important to do that. And then as far as, you know, tracking your ROI, you know, it's not an easy thing to do. You know, your net operating income it's always a challenge, you know, because you want to maximize that number while delivering the best experience you can to your guests. And if you're looking to increase and improve their experience, some of the investments you make are not cheap. So the first few years when we took over, it wasn't, you know, my NOI wasn't where I wanted it to be. But you need to quantify that and see, you know, how far off am I? Because you always want it to be around that 50% of your gross number. That's the target. And then looking at the areas where you can improve. And one of the things that always pops up to me is, you know, those darn OTA commissions. You know, how can we bring that down? And who can you work with to bring that down? We work with Q4 Launch as our marketing company, so it's always, you know, collaborating with them to figure out how do we drive more of those direct bookings, and what else can we do, and other relationships to maximize that as much as possible. Not easy though. It's never done. You know, and pushing up the top line as much as you can, so that 50% number is more, you know, so you can absorb a little bit more expenses. But it's not an easy thing to do, and it's not something you should spend hours on every month. You know, you should look at it, and, you know, once a year, once your season is over, you should do a debrief of the year and set up your plan for the next year. And then it should be something that you just sort of run and look at and monitor and spot check the areas where you know you can save some money, whether it's food, you know, are you spending too much on food? Do you need better partners as far as purveyors of your food? Is it staffing? Do you need to refigure your staffing costs? Are there more efficient ways, maybe sharing people in different areas, or does it have to be separated between housekeeping and serving, or whatever it is? There are efficient ways to look at that to improve those numbers, but it's never done. And I know we don't have a lot of time here, and I'm happy to talk to anyone if you ever want to reach out to me for more about this, because I could talk all day about this.
Very true. So we're getting close to the end here, but just talking about value in this year, you're in a little bit of a fake it till you make it situation. You wouldn't ever want to put your profit and loss statement for 2020 in front of a lender as the example of what your business is worth. But everyone is in this situation, so it's not as if you have done something to create a problem. What you really need to have is to have a plan that you can rely on for how do I get from here. So it's less about wallowing in, oh my God, this is going to be an awful year and there's nothing we can do, and you know, it's we didn't do anything wrong and yet here we are. Well, we need to get over that and get on with, if this is where we are, then let's get a plan together that says how we climb out of this hole, and we insulate ourselves by doing the right kind of work and by sort of focusing on those 5 assets on a regular basis to make sure that you're maximizing. So don't, you know, get rid of all of that anxiety and that ugly feeling, but hang on to the importance of having a plan that gets you as far as you possibly can get when something out of your control actually happens. So it's all about the plan. And once you've done a plan, it's not a daily event, as Marco said, but once you've done a plan, use it. Go back and look at it. Know when you're not paying attention and get yourself back where you need to be. It's about taking responsibility, but it's also about return on investment. And it's it's a job, it's your job to do this, but it's a job that pays pretty well at the end of the day. I think that's the thing to keep in mind. There's a payoff for doing it right. And thank you so much for spending the time. Love